I was trying to get it so I could record. Last week, apparently something happened and we couldn't get the recording done. So I've got Tracy, Victoria, Bakita. Is there anybody else who's out there this evening? Janetta. Janetta, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me, Janetta? Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. I'm going to try my best to not keep us too long tonight. I don't know how much the weather's going to cooperate with us because we've got this nasty, nasty weather going on. Like I said last week, apparently I did not turn the record part on, so I could not send you all the recording from the meeting last week. So I'm going to try my best to make sure I don't mess that up this time. Anyhow, hey Keisha, how are you doing? How are you doing, Keisha? Can you hear me? Keisha just got on with us. Okay. Keisha, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Professor. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So is it snowing where you all are yet?
Yes, it is. Yay!
It's snowing.
So everybody's excited because they have a day off tomorrow, huh?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. You know, this is funny. This is the first time ever I've not had to worry about a snow day. And I told my wife, I said, you know, because she's still teaching, and you know, and I said, I don't know how to act. I'm not used to having snow and I having to worry about trying to figure out how to make the day up. I said, I don't even know how to act. I just, you know, so I'm just gonna have to play this one by ear, I suppose. But anyhow, real quick, I started on your classroom management projects. I should have them done now that we got a snowstorm and we're gonna be inside. I should have them done fairly quickly anyway. But all things considered, this week I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about your functional behavior assessment that's due on Sunday night. Have you all gone to that on the Moodle yet to take a look at it?
Yes.
Yes.
I looked at it.
I'll be honest, it's not as difficult as it sounds, okay? One of the things, like I said, I don't mind you all doing it if you want to take it and pull it onto your desktop and make it into a Word document and just respond below the little sections. I don't mind y'all doing that as long as you respond in complete sentences. You know, you can do it in another color so I can pick them out when you upload it and send it back. But I mean, here we are. When you think about it, we're going to end this semester on the 8th of March, 2 weeks from Sunday night. We're going to end this semester. So, it'll all be done, and then everybody will be moving on from there. So that being said, we got a couple of things to do. We have the FBA that we're going to be doing this week. Next week, we're going to do the behavior intervention plan. Now, when you get into week 7 and you look at week 7 on the behavior intervention plan, I just want to share this with you now, because if you want to go ahead and read it, you can certainly go ahead and read it. There's an essay in week 7 that's entitled Shame, and it was written by Dick Gregory. And I want you to use that particular essay because he's writing it about his own experiences in school. I want you to use that essay, and you're going to write the behavior intervention plan for him in that essay. He's writing about his experiences in school as a kid. And basically what I want you to do is I want you to create a behavior intervention plan for him, okay, based on what was in the essay. And then, of course, the very last thing you're going to do for me that's due on the 8th of March is going to be the essay on emotional intelligence, which there's an article there I want you to read, and then I want you to write an essay about the importance of emotional intelligence. But we'll cover that stuff as we get to it, so it's nothing to be worried about right now, but it's just something I wanted to go ahead and talk about real quick. Let's just take a minute and talk about the classroom management plans. when you all started going through putting your plans together, what were some of maybe the aha moments y'all had with putting your plans together? What were some of the things that popped up that you thought, well, gee, I hadn't even thought about that now, and now I really do need to think about it? What were some things that you all of a sudden, you were having to maybe think about how you were going to do things? Can can you can you all hear me? Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I did.
Yes.
Okay. Anything come to mind when you were working on your classroom management plan that maybe you hadn't thought about before?
I'm trying to remember the questions that was up there. I can't remember them right now.
Well, if you remember, I was, we asked some questions about the way your classroom was arranged, what the expectations were for kids, turning in work and things along those lines. If you remember, I'm gonna flip back to it here for a second. Um, you know, support systems in the school, what kind of, which people could you rely on to help you do things? You know, how your classroom was arranged, um, behavior expectations, student work expectations, if you remember.
Now, I do have a question about one of those questions.
Uh-huh.
I know where I'm at. I have never seen a social worker come in my class yet.
Okay. Now, are you in a school, or are you in a pre-K
Well,
program?
I'm in a pre-K program in a school.
Uh-huh.
So I have not seen a social worker, and I've seen the nurse probably about once or twice come in the classroom.
Okay. All right. Well, what about say like your school counselor? Does the school counselor serve you all?
No,
So the school counselor, y'all don't even have access to the school counselor, even though you're within the school building.
I guess if we need her to come, I guess she will come.
Uh-huh.
But you know,
But
The
I take,
way that
go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Tracy.
The way that I did mine, because we don't have, like, we're a Head Start and we don't have like a school counselor, or
Uh-huh.
we don't even have a nurse, but we have someone that's called gosh, I can't think of what her official title is right now, but it's the one, she handles all the medicines. Like if a child has to have medicine, it has to go through her first. And
Uh-huh.
so I just kind of described somewhat of what her role is, basically saying like, if the child has to have medicine, it's proper paperwork that has to be filled out before we can even begin to administer medicine, things of that nature. I did it in a sense like that, since we don't officially have a nurse.
Well, that would be certainly okay, because one of the things that happens is that everybody's not going to be set up like a regular K-12 school would be set up. But if you're an NC pre-K program that's freestanding on its own, or you're in a Head Start program that really is not connected to a school per se, there are going to be some places like that where you're probably going to have to there probably going to have to be some other arrangements made for those things to take place, and that's quite all right. Like I said, one of the things about it, those of you all who are not in traditional K-12 programs, um, there's a little flexibility, because I do know that you all, they're not going to put everything in a Head Start program that they've got in a traditional kindergarten somewhere. So with that being said, don't get upset if you don't have it, and and you had to describe another way of how you handle that particular task. That'll be fine.
Okay.
I'm not taking that. I'm not taking that and using that on anybody, because, like I said, everybody's a little bit different. I mean, we have folks who are working out of charter schools, and some of the charter schools are so much different than anything that we work in. When we're working with, say, state or federal money, like with Head Starts or NC Pre-K or the public schools. So, some of the charter schools are arranged somewhat differently, and some of the private schools are arranged a whole lot differently. So that being said, don't worry about that part. Now, I wanted to take a couple of minutes tonight, and I wanted to talk a little bit about this functional behavior assessment a little bit, because, one of the things about behavior problems is that, we have to start thinking about things with students that exhibit behaviors that impede people learning. You know, for example, when we see these individual behavior change plans, when we set up a plan for a child, whether it's a child who's has severe behavioral issues, or maybe a child that has other issues that become behavioral issues, we have to think about a few things. What are we generally thinking about most of the time when we're looking at creating a plan for a child to help a child address his or her behaviors? What are the things that immediately come to our minds?
What's triggering the behavior? How often the behavior is happening?
Okay, that's a
The
good point.
setting.
That's a good point, because Tracy, I like that you mentioned that, and I was sitting there thinking about my own daughter. My daughter is a chatterbox. My daughter is a chatterbox everywhere, but when she's in the library, she will not say a word in the library, because the librarian talked about how good she's in the library, how she likes to go in there, and she likes to, when the class is in there, she likes to sit and she likes to listen to the stories, and she's always been someone who liked to hear a story read. But the thing is she's a chatterbox everywhere else. And so we have to address that. And, that's one of those things. But you mentioned something about the setting that was really important. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen a kid who just honestly, whatever, they had a failure to get along with a particular teacher, and it wasn't anything that was just terrible. Something just rubbed the kid wrong, and there was nothing that you could do about it. It was what it was.
Yes. I've lived that this year. As a matter of fact, the student that was in my classroom just did not get along with my former coworker, and I began to sit and watch their interactions together, and it's almost kind of like she was poking the bear. We knew that he had some sort of issues, but it was like she was making it bigger than what it was. He would spaz out, and I'd be like, okay, he'll be fine. Give him his moment, and then he'll come back. And just, no, I want him over here now, da-da-da-da, whatnot. And that made it a whole 10 times worse, when you could have just left him alone and gave him that moment.
Well, it's funny. You mentioned something in here, because this is one of those things that as educators, we are notoriously bad for this. We're the grown-up. We have to have the last word.
Yeah.
And we're going to get that last word in. Even if the whole class comes to shambles, we're going to get that last word in. And, when we're talking about classroom management and effective classroom management, the very best folks in your building who are the best at managing a classroom, they don't get the last word. They don't try to get the last word. It happens. And, matter of fact, they do everything but take the last word. I had an old principal one time who used to tell me, said, you don't have to have the last word, but you have to take the last action. Whatever that happens to be, you're going to have to take the last action. But, and that's one of the things that, when you're looking at things that maybe they're triggers for children's behaviors, as grown-ups, we have triggers to our behaviors. Think about it. I know that if I want to drive my wife through the roof, all I have to do is just make the comment like, well, fine, go ahead. And I'm going to tell you right now, it is on, and I might as well just go sleep in the car. But the reason why I say that is that, sometimes our tendencies to feel like we have to have the last word sometimes keep us from effectively working with children. But, behavior change plans, if you think about these, when you're doing your functional behavior assessment, and later when you're doing the behavior intervention plan next week, one of the things about behavior change plans is that it's just that. We're trying to help you change a behavior that is not helping you. Like, for example, You know, anybody have one of those little folks who love to cuss? Anybody got a cusser? I've had them in my classroom. They love to cuss. They know God's last name and they will use it in a minute. That joke will come up later. You'll figure out what his last name is after I said that. But you know, and they will do it because the adults they've been around do it, and they just assume it's fine. I had this little boy when I first became a principal, and his name was Tyler, and this is the worst last name to have if you're just a bad kid. Conquest. That was his last name. And I'm gonna tell you something. He was a child who was mama was single. She had him much later in life. I don't think she had initially intended to have children, but she had him. And mama was a partier. And anyway, and so the house was usually full of a bunch of people just, you know, hanging out, partying. I mean, you know, they were, you know, she was into having, you know, a lot of folks who hung around, a lot of bikers. You know, that's one of the things I remember about whenever you went to the house. There were always a lot of bikers hanging around, a lot of motorcycles and whatever. But you know, one of their neighbors told me one time that when he was little, when they'd have these parties, they used to think it was cute for him to come out there and cuss because he was 4 years old and he knew all these curse words and he would just use them. Well, that's fine there in that environment because that's acceptable to her. But then a year later, when he comes to kindergarten and he's cursing everybody out, a little bit of a problem, don't you think? So, you know, one of the things we really had to work on with this kid was we had to work on this with this kid that there were two sets of rules. There was the set of rules we have at school that you have to follow or you end up in trouble, and the set of rules at home. And the rules that are okay at home may not be okay at school. So when we wrote his behavior intervention plan, we had to think about what were optimal behaviors, what were behaviors we could live with, and what were behaviors we just could not abide by, that we had to do something about. You know, and that's one of the things about behavior intervention plans. Tonight we're talking about those a little bit. When you're talking about a behavior plan to change a child's behavior, you're trying to do what with the behavior? You're trying to get them to change it to what kind of a behavior?
A positive behavior.
Well, it's got to be a positive behavior. It's got to be replaced, a replacement behavior. It's kind of like this. I'm just going to use it. I'm going to use a biblical example. You know, you remember the story. You remember the story about Saul on the road to Damascus when he was blinded because he was going to arrest members of the early church. Okay, and he had a conversion experience. You know, he had this Damascus Road experience, and he realized he was going to have to do differently, and that's all there was to it. And so he presents himself to the elders at the church in Jerusalem, and the first thing they questioned whether or not he was being sincere because of his past history of being someone who basically executed members of the church. So when you think about that, you know, one of the things about behavior intervention and replacement behavior is you're trying to replace behaviors with behaviors that are not going to cause you to have trouble, you know, further in society. Remember, everything we do at school has an ultimate goal. Tracy, what were you saying? I see you repeating back.
Oh, it was nothing.
Oh, I lost. There you are. I lost your video there, and now you're back. Okay, I saw it come back and said Tracy is talking, but I couldn't see you. But one of the things about replacement behaviors is replacement behaviors should be long-lasting behaviors. They should be behaviors that they're going to continue to build on over time. When we learn a replacement behavior, you know, it's kind of like, for example, if someone's quitting smoking. If they're quitting smoking, you know, they got to learn a replacement behavior because, you know, not only is it a habit, but it's an addiction. So you got to learn a behavior to replace it. So what might you do? If you really want to quit, you might chew a whole bunch of gum. You may be chewing gum like crazy, so you won't think about smoking. Or you may decide that every time you think you want to smoke, you need to go out and go exercise. So you go exercise. But the point is you learn a replacement behavior. And that's what a behavior intervention plan or a behavior change plan does, is help them learn a behavior replacement. Let me ask you real quick for a second. How many of you have ever seen a child that you work with who there's an antecedent leading up to the behavior? Can anybody share one with me that maybe they've seen a kid do, that they know that it's getting ready, and it's going to be on because of the fact that you saw this antecedent that led up?
I can share one, Mr. Gaines.
Okay. All right, Victoria.
I'm gonna use my daughter for example. She has a little girl she calls her best friend, and she loves the ground she walks on, and the little girl loves her, but they have like this love-hate relationship. And that little girl knows exactly what to do to trigger my daughter.
Okay.
She could be somewhere playing by herself, or she could be at the table doing a tabletop, or she could be playing around with stampers or something like that. And she'll just walk up to her and nudge her or take it from her just to get a reaction out of her. You know what I'm saying? So then
that's the antecedent.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then I try to give them the option to I like to tell my kids, well, what can you do to work this out? Y'all talk about it and y'all try to work it out. And I can never seem to get them to work it out. And it's aggravating. It's almost like one of those things where I just want to pull her from that school because they're in the same class. It's like they see each other all the time. So they feed off each other all the time, because they tried to go outside today, but they couldn't go because the ground was too wet. So my daughter was the first one over to the cubby to put her jacket in there, and the girl seen it. So what did she do? She ran over there and she pushed her out the way. But then she had to be all extra with it and fall out on the floor. That type deal. And I looked at my daughter. She had untriggered her and she was going to go back at her. So I don't know how to handle that.
Well, let me ask you a question. When you're in a classroom and you're seeing something, that say, maybe things are getting real busy, and that say this child is getting ready to explode. You kind of see the build up. I mean, thinking about the build up, if you're writing a plan, what are some things you're probably going to do as far as the build up is concerned before it actually becomes an incident?
Trying to find a way to de-escalate, I guess I want to say, the behavior. Like I think when I was doing my my plan today, I think I put somewhere in there as far as like taking the child like one-on-one maybe, and then like a little, like a smaller group setting, and do some one-on-one activities with the child to try to.
Okay. And of course, you're talking about diverting the child's attention into another activity so that they'll settle and focus and work on that activity, and by the time they're done, that will have already whatever was the catalyst is already gone and over with. Sometimes it's that simple. Other times it's even simpler than that. Sometimes it's just a matter of can I sit down? Can I sit down beside you?
Right.
The proxemics of being there, sometimes you can get a kid to let you just sit down beside them. And then sometimes, we have other things that come up that we pull into our little arsenal of tools we can use too. Proxemics, another activity. I mentioned last week, how many of you send a kid with a folder or with a note to another classroom? Go down to so and so and get this or whatever, and you've written a note to, like you got a teacher buddy on the hall that you send the kid down, and the note's always the same. Please send back 2 file folders or something like that. You have kind of that little code, and it's just to get the kid to break the train of thought so that when they come back, that's not an issue. One of the things I'll just say is that when you're working on these behavior intervention plans, when you're working on these functional behavior assessments, always, think about an alternative that allows you to teach a replacement behavior. But talk about replacement behaviors. One of the things I think is funny, because we do it as adults all the time. We teach ourselves replacement behaviors all the time. For example, if you're late getting to work every day for a week, you're going to teach yourself a replacement behavior because you know how to do it. What are you going to do? You're going to start setting the alarm clock earlier, or you're going to lay out your clothes and everything the night before. That's a replacement behavior. Okay. Because my wife and I have always gone round and round about this. For example, she will wake up in the morning and then go in her closet to find clothes. Me, I've always been one of those people that I'm laying out the night before what I'm going to wear. And for example, when I was still working the school building, all the time, one of the things, and I still do it with my wife and my daughter, I am not going to be trying to pack a lunchbox at 6:30 in the morning. I'm just not gonna do it.
No.
Right.
No way, Jose. I am not going to do it. I mean, and that's one of those things. I mean, if I'm packing lunch and it's my week to do it, I'm packing them before I go to bed. They're in the refrigerator. You get your lunchbox on the way out the door, and that way everything's done, instead of us sitting there trying to fuss over what's going in a lunchbox at 6:30 in the morning. Because, you think about it. One of the things about that process is you've alleviated all those extra steps that cause confusion because you can't find something, because the night before you put all the stuff together to make sure it was in place. One of my things that I was always a big person about was, for example, in the mornings, you had your clothes laid out, you got dressed, you came downstairs. I had the coffee pot on the timer so that, I poured the coffee in the coffee cup, walked right out the door and got in my truck and went to school. It was not a big problem. Whereas, some people are in the morning trying to make breakfast, trying to do this, trying to do that, trying to get the coffee pot to work, trying to, and on top of that, trying to get everybody dressed and out of the house. So like I said, sometimes we create a replacement behavior. One of the things I think is kind of interesting is that when we're talking about behavior interventions and we're talking about what's going on, a lot of times if you'll think about behaviors and what happens, what's our natural tendency when a kid acts out or misbehaves or disrupts a process in class or disrupts the learning for everybody? What's our natural tendency?
You need to send them out of class.
Get them out of here. You got to go. I haven't got time for you or your foolishness. You have to go. And, one of the things about it is, honestly, when you're starting to think about the children and the learning process, that's probably one of the worst things we've ever done in this profession, is sent someone out of class like that. Because the point is that, you all know that as well as I do, that, you're going to work with people you might not even like.
That's
You know,
right.
you might, you very well might work next door to someone you can't stand, but you got to work together. So you figure out how to do it. And children are going to be the same way. Just because, for example, just because we all teach second grade, that doesn't necessarily mean we're all the best of friends, or just because we all work in the same school doesn't mean that on Sunday we're all going to get together and go hang out. We'd like to think that, but in all honesty, people have their tendencies to they have their groups of friends, and sometimes their groups of friends are not the same groups of friends that that they work with. And, so, as grown-ups, as adults, we've had to learn to create working relationships that may not be personal relationships. Okay. That's kind of the same thing with children at school. There are children that I don't care. I mean, I love listening to teachers who say, well, do you like children? Oh, I love children. I love children. Well, then why'd you put that one in the hallway? If you love them so much, why'd you put them in the hallway? If you love them so much, why'd you make them walk laps on the blacktop at recess? If you love them so much, why'd you do this? The thing is that I always tell teachers all the time, when we're teaching a replacement behavior, you've got to like the kid enough to want to teach the replacement behavior to them. You can love them and not like them, okay? There are a lot of people in our profession who are in love with the idea of helping children, but they don't like the children. I mean, let's be honest. Children are sometimes kind of a little gross sometimes, They got runny noses. They're not going to tie the shoes. If your little boy, you probably won't come running out of the bathroom and not have your pants on right the way you're supposed to. Or, I had one who was a streaker. I mean, he'd go in the bathroom when I was an elementary school principal. He'd go in the bathroom and he'd strip down to his socks, and he'd run around in circles, building up speed to shoot out of the bathroom. And he was a kindergartner, and and you had to move quick, or everybody was going to get to see Devin. and it was funny. I mean, it was funny because it wasn't that he thought anything was wrong about it. He probably ran from the bathroom to his bedroom at home without a stitch on all the time.
But it was fine.
It was fine. I mean, he felt comfortable in his own skin. We just didn't feel comfortable watching him in his own skin, But that being said, that whole idea of teaching replacement behaviors, we're teaching behaviors further than just the end of the school year. And one of the things I'll tell you is, as you're creating these behavior intervention plans for children, or these functional behavior assessments where you're starting to look for trends in their behaviors, remember your goal, you're a stop on the way to getting that kid across the stage in 12 years. When you think about it, you're one of the stops on the way. And the ultimate goal for everybody's got to be, are we going to get that child to graduation day and get him across that stage? That's the goal. It's not just get him to kindergarten if it's pre-K, or get him to first grade if it's kindergarten, or get him to fifth grade if it's fourth grade. We got to get him across the stage of graduation, or her across the stage of graduation. So, when we think about that, what are long-term goals that we need to have that need to be addressed now at the age the child's at? When you're looking at your functional behavior assessment, think about that, because that child, you're teaching lessons, and hopefully you're teaching replacement behaviors that carry that child further than just the end of the school year with you. Okay. But looking at these whole behavior intervention plans, when you go through this chapter, the one that you had to read for tonight, I think it was 349 to 395, they give you a lot of things to think about in here, about things that you might want to look at when you're thinking about a functional behavior assessment. Now, we've got less than a minute, so I'm not going to keep anybody longer tonight because this weather is crazy, and I don't want to have you all up doing this and needing to do other things at home tonight. So we're going to wrap up in just a second. But when you do your functional behavior assessment, I'm home all weekend. I'm going nowhere all weekend. I am here. So if you need me, call me, send me an email, get in touch with me, and I will try my best to help you get your project where you're ready to go for this assignment this week. Okay.